Economic policy often comes down to balance, and few issues illustrate this more dramatically than the debate over tariffs. On the surface, imposing tariffs, taxes on imported goods, can look like a swift move to defend domestic industries, protect jobs, and put the national interest first. But when we peer beneath that initial appeal, the story becomes far more complex. Tariffs can, in certain conditions, drive an economic boom, but they are just as likely, or more so according to most experts, to weigh the economy down, especially if implemented broadly and without precision. Let's start by looking at the possible drivers of an economic boom that tariffs can spark, at least in the short run. When foreign goods become more expensive because of tariffs, U.S. manufacturers stand to gain a substantial edge. Suddenly, they are no longer competing on price against products made in countries with lower labor costs or less restrictive regulations. This could lead to a surge in domestic manufacturing, with industries like steel, automobiles, and electronics experiencing a renaissance. Factories that had been shuttered could roar back to life, hiring workers and placing orders with local suppliers. Such a resurgence might not only provide direct jobs on assembly lines, but ripple throughout related sectors, from raw materials to shipping and logistics, revitalizing entire regions. Short-term optimism can further fuel these effects. Economic policy, after all, is as much about perception as it is about numbers. When the government embraces America First policies, many businesses and voters feel a sense of renewed confidence. That optimism can become self-reinforcing. Consumers are more likely to spend, entrepreneurs become more willing to invest, and investors sense opportunity rather than risk. For a while, this heightened sentiment can create real economic momentum, lifting everything from big business profits to Main Street sales. Even if the boom is based partly on hope, hope itself can have tangible economic consequences. Another often overlooked benefit is the revenue that tariffs generate for the government. Every tax collected at the border is money added to federal coffers, money that can be spent on much-needed domestic programs. Imagine billions of dollars flowing into infrastructure projects, new bridges, highways, and energy grids, or subsidies aimed at supporting industries that are developing cutting-edge technologies, from renewable energy to advanced semiconductors. By directing tariff revenue into productive investments, the government could further stoke economic activity, creating jobs immediately and laying the groundwork for future growth. Yet, even as we note these possible upsides, the risks associated with tariffs remain significant and generally loom larger. Behind every dollar gained in government revenue, there's another taken from somewhere else in the economy, most often directly from consumers. Tariffs are, simply put, a tax. They make everyday goods more expensive for families who may already be struggling to make ends meet. Everything from cars to clothes to kitchen appliances could cost more, particularly hurting lower and middle-income households. These are the people who spend the largest proportion of their income on goods and services, and who are most vulnerable to any reductions in purchasing power. When prices rise across the board, families cut back, which weakens consumer demand and, ultimately, overall economic growth. The impact doesn't stop with higher prices. Tariffs can disrupt the very fabric of the modern economy, its global supply chains. Manufacturing today is an intricate dance, with components sourced around the world, often traveling thousands of miles before final assembly. When tariffs carve up these supply lines, businesses don't simply snap their fingers and find new suppliers. Transitioning to domestic production can take years, if not decades, and in the interim, companies face delays, shortages, and soaring costs. Inefficiencies multiply, productivity falters, and the promise of a revitalized manufacturing sector becomes tangled in red tape and logistical headaches. Retaliation from other countries presents another serious threat. International trade is not a one-way street. It's an intricate network of give and take. If the U.S. raises tariffs on imports, countries like China or the European Union are likely to respond in kind, slapping tariffs on American goods, everything from soybeans to passenger jets. For many U.S. industries, especially agriculture, technology, and aerospace, these markets are essential. The result is a cycle of escalating penalties that not only hammers exporters, but infuses uncertainty into global commerce, undermining trust and collaboration. All this turmoil can lead to inflation, as businesses pass their own higher costs onto consumers. If prices climb too quickly, the Federal Reserve could feel compelled to step in, raising interest rates to cool things down. But higher rates make borrowing more expensive for everyone, from families trying to buy homes or cars to businesses looking to expand. Credit contracts, investment stalls, and what began as a policy to spark growth can unexpectedly bring the economy to a grinding halt. So what conditions would need to be in place for tariffs to actually fuel a real, sustainable boom? First, tariffs would have to be smartly targeted, focusing on industries that are genuinely critical for national security or long-term competitiveness, rather than sweeping tariffs on everything under the sun. Equally important would be pairing these tariffs with robust domestic investment policies, tax credits for new manufacturing capacity, federal spending on research and infrastructure, and policies that help businesses retrain workers or upgrade technology could all multiply the beneficial effects. Global cooperation is another key ingredient. If the U.S. could work with allies to create a unified response, rather than provoking trade wars, it might avoid the worst retaliatory measures. And, of course, the resilience of domestic supply chains is critical. Industries would need to adapt quickly, scaling up production and efficiency to meet increased demand, rather than simply passing on costs or grappling with bottlenecks. When you look at the broad consensus among economists, the conclusion is sobering. Aggressive, wide-reaching tariffs, such as proposals for a 10% tariff on all imports or a 60% tariff on goods from China, are more likely to push the economy towards stagnation or even stagflation than they are to deliver a boom. The drag from higher consumer prices, supply chain disarray, and global friction tends to outweigh any short-term growth in select industries. Still, that doesn't mean all tariffs are created equal. There's a case to be made for the limited, strategic use of tariffs, especially when tightly coupled with smart domestic policies. Under the right circumstances, they can serve as a lever, nudging industry to invest and adapt. But every action comes with trade-offs. The key is not to rely on tariffs as a cure-all, but to recognize them as just one tool among many, a tool that must be used with great care, balance, and a clear understanding of the stakes involved. Ultimately, whether tariffs set the stage for recession or boom depends less on the idea itself and more on how wisely and judiciously policymakers make use of this double-edged sword.